Hi everyone. Just wanted to touch base with you on one particular topic that keeps coming up. My name is Shelia Huggins and I am a business law attorney in North Carolina. I work with small business owners, large business owners, those that have been in business for a long time, and a lot of times I'm working with businesses that have just started, or sometimes people are trying to get some things into place as they're thinking about starting a business. But one thing that I run into a lot is that people are asking about working with other people. And so even if it's not something that's a formal like business partnership, you're bringing somebody else into your business, a lot of times it's, hey, we've got this event that we're doing and I'm partnering with another company, or hey, I've got my business product and this store is going to let me use part of their space for free. How do I decide whether or not I want to do something with this business? Is it a good deal for me? What should I be on the lookout for? And there's a whole list of things. I actually pulled up an old presentation that I had done a while back, because this is probably one of the biggest things that I see going on all across the business industry. And that is people collaborating together. And typically they are doing it in these sorts of informal ways, and they are not taking into account problems that can arise. And so a lot of times I say, hey, the moment you can sit down with the other person and at least talk through and put down on paper some of the specifics, at least those are the things that you know probably are not going to be hassles. So even if you have a perfect contract in place and you worked days and days and days and spent hours trying to capture everything, you're never going to capture everything. But the peace of mind that you should have is that at least I've covered some things, you know? And so I can say to myself, at least I know these things probably won't be the issues that we'll run into, but it'll be other things, because as you know, we're human and we can never think of everything that may happen with a business. So I wanted to talk through, especially really considering how you decide whether or not you're going to work with somebody else. And like I said, it could be, you know, very formal. You and a friend want to start a business together. That's a very formal business relationship. And so, you know, you need to think about not just the business entity type. Is it going to be a corporation or a limited liability company? Or are we two separate companies coming together through some sort of partnership agreement or joint venture agreement? Or is it, just like I said before, something a little more informal? And that's the kind of stuff we tend to do all the time. I recently attended an event, and a friend of mine had put it on, and he had brought in a whole bunch of musicians, and he was having an event, and they were going to come in and they were performing, you know. And so you had music, he had a space he was renting out, he had people who were helping sponsor the event with him, and yet you know, it was very informal, and the event was a great success. Very few issues. I didn't hear of any issues, and yet, you know, we never sat down and he never said, hey Sheila, can you pull this all together for me in some sort of business arrangement? You know, a lot of times I work with people who are on the creative side of the business industry. So a lot of times they may be musicians, they're other artists, they're filmmakers, they're writers. And so we're more interested in doing that, and we spend less time like, who wants to sit down and like talk to an attorney and say, well, what do I have to put in this agreement? You really want to be out there, for instance, with that particular event, you want to be out there saying, hey, I can't wait to pull these musicians together, and here's the space we're going to be, and here are the tickets, and here's, you know, we've got our Facebook event post, and share it. Like, that's the fun part. That's why you're in the business, right? So a lot of times this whole contract piece on how we're going to work together gets put on the side. So I wanted you to just sort of take a moment to share with our Black Business Owners Network about some of the things you can think about as you're going into business with people. Even if you have a space that you're thinking about renting out to somebody, how you're going into these relationships and some of the things you should be thinking about, some of those red flags. And I tell people all the time, the gut instinct, the things you already have some concerns about, like those are the things we want to pay particular interest to when we're talking about doing these activities with other people. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the advantages and disadvantages of working with other people, how you vet parties. Like I really kicked it off, and maybe he was, the best friend of another person I had worked closely with. But beyond that, like, what should I be thinking about, Sheila? What should I be looking for? Business considerations, legal considerations, tax implications, So if you're partnering together and you're having some event and maybe somebody's selling some stuff and you split some proceeds, like who's counting what is income, and what if there were expenses? Like, how is all that being divvied up and decided, right? And then just a few takeaways just that you can sort of walk away with. So let me sort of go through this. And like I said before, this is sort of a presentation I haven't done in a while, so I'm going to skip all this stuff that I normally do when I do it in person. Well, I guess I could do a little bit about me. Typically what I do when I do presentations in person is I'll give a little bit of background about myself, and then I'll also ask people who are in the room to share where they are with their business, so that I can make sure that I'm answering the questions in a way that is reflective of what their needs are, right? And so, like I said before, I'm an attorney. I focus primarily on business law. I'm located in North Carolina. I also help people with business strategy. And so on the legal side, it's like, hey, here's the contract. But on the business strategy side, it's, hey, well, how can we maximize what we put in the contract to make sure you're able to build the, get the money you need, okay? And so that's sort of it for me. All right, so I sort of like move through a couple of things. All right, so let's talk about just partnership in general, because a lot of times we, don't think of working in partnership with people. So I'm just going to throw some words out there that to sort of let you know, hey, Sheila said, here's when I should be thinking a little more in depth when I'm working with somebody. It sounds like it's a cooperation, it's an association, a collaboration. A lot of times we talk about collaborating with other people, a coalition, an alliance, a union, affiliation, relationship. Hey, we're always trying to build relationships, right? It may be with a company, a firm, a business, a corporation, organization, association, syndicate, all of that. So all of those sorts of things we sometimes think of formally as partnerships, right? All right, so let me scroll down a little bit more. And again, we're just talking about how to think about going into business relationships with other people. All right, from the SBA. The SBA says a partnership is a single business where two or more people share ownership. So again, that's sort of that formal term. And then the IRS has its own term. So, if you go to the IRS the website, they'll give you like a particular definition. And of course, like I said before, there are tax implications that result if you're forming a formal business partnership. So there are generally three types of partnerships. So there are general partnerships and people who are in a general partnership company, like it's I don't know, triangle rock building partnership, general partnership, and all of the partners own a piece of the company, and the income is divided up among them depending upon what the partnership agreement says. You can also have limited liability partnerships, just like you have limited liability companies, so very similar to that. And then you can have what's called joint ventures, and so this is so typically a joint venture is where you have two or more parties coming together around a project. And so the project may be temporary in basis, or it may be a little longer term, but it's not generally something that's continuing in perpetuity. So that's something to sort of think about. It can be ongoing, it just depends. All right, so forming, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that. All right, so let's move into like these advantages and disadvantages, because that's one of the bigger pieces. So whenever you're thinking about working with somebody else, like it's like, why should I work with you? So the next time somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I have an idea about how we can work together, and here are some of the things that I'm thinking, like write all that stuff down and then come back to this video and be like, okay, Sheila gave me these advantages. And if you're not checking off some of those boxes, then this might not be the right partnership deal for you, right? I mean, remember, I'm not just talking about formal partnerships. I'm talking about arrangements where we're working together with other people. So some advantages. You're thinking about economies of scale. You know, like maybe you want to rent out a space with somebody else, or maybe you all want to come together to sponsor an event. You know, so the more people involved, the bigger the network, that sort of thing. So you're able to take advantage of economies of scale. Network development, okay? So say you've already got a pretty good network and this person's like, oh, we should come together, and you find out like that person really hasn't done anything in the industry, and their plan, when you look at it, it's not quite together. It doesn't look like they have a network and that they're going to be able to build a network in the next, 5 years. This might not be the right time for you to do something with that party. It just depends. This is just one of the things you're thinking about. But you want to be able to both parties should be able to build based on what they're bringing to the arrangement. So maybe one party is bringing resources and, monetary resources, maybe, and another party's bringing network. So I'm not saying that that's have to check the box on. I'm just saying it's one of those things that you consider as you're thinking about whether or not this is going to be a really good partnership. Because this is what I tell people. If you do your research up front, it's less likely that you're going to be disappointed down the road. So if you don't have a conversation with somebody up front about what some of these advantages are going to be, then you may think you're going into this arrangement with somebody and find out that, hey, this is not quite what I had in mind. And so some of that you could have gotten up front had you sort of talked about some of these. Capital investment. So you want to make sure, people are able to bring something to the table. So, you're saying, hey, we're both going to contribute $500. You're good to go, right? Additional skills, expertise, and resources. Okay, so beyond money, beyond network, okay, beyond economies of scale, what else are you bringing to the table? Okay. Additional revenue streams that you may not have, okay, or may not have thought about. Similar interests and background, and then reduced expense costs. So again, those are sort of the advantages that you're thinking about when you're saying, hey, do I want to do this with them or not? Or, maybe I want to do it with another party. But in any case, a lot of times what you're looking at doing is making sure that you're a really good fit with the other party, and that, yes, it's good that you don't necessarily match in every single way, because why would that be good? What you want to look for is somebody who's filling in some of your gaps too, because like I said before, maybe you're the one with the money and you don't really have the network, and maybe that person doesn't have a whole lot of money to invest at this time, but they've got this awesome network, right? So that might be a relationship that you need to talk a little bit more deeply about. All right. Disadvantages. Okay. So the liability, so once you team up with this other party, suppose there are like some outstanding legal issues related to them, or, suppose it's not really clear who's going to be responsible for something, and then something happens at the event, or something happens on the property, and people start suing both of you, and you're like, hey, wait, I wasn't even there. The event hadn't even started. That was not even that was all him. So you increase, the more people you bring on board, the more opportunity there is to have something go wrong. And so as a result, your risk of liability sort of increases, okay? It's like an economy of scale for risk, and that's sort of the way that works. Reputational concerns. This is a really big one. Okay, so if you've already heard some bad things in your community about somebody, why would you want to partner with them, right? People tend to think, okay, birds of a feather flock together. So if you are hanging around this person and that person has a bad reputation in the community about their products not being really good, their service always sucking, whatever it is. And people are going to think, well, oh my gosh, you know, is this person the same way? And so you have to look at it from a reputational standpoint also. And to give an example, I was recently meeting with a good friend of mine, and he was entering into this sort of relationship with a whole bunch of other people. And so he mentioned to me later that someone had a concern about me because they saw me at an event speaking to someone else who has a business. And the person who had the concern was like, oh, well, if she knows that person, then I don't know that I want to work with her because this other person I had trouble with. And it was just sort of interesting to me because I didn't have any sort of business arrangement with the other person. I was just talking to the other person at an event where lots of people were talking. So it was very interesting. But it also gave me a clue into how that person was thinking, because then I realized that, you know, you have to be willing to dig a little deeper beyond just, you know, surface appearances about people, and really sort of checking in whether or not what's been said is actually something true, and whether or not what you're holding somebody out to be, whether or not that's like reality. So for instance, in that case, she just made an assumption because I was at an event talking to somebody, so therefore I must be bad like the other person. But oh well. Regulatory requirements. So I mean, you know, if you're having an event and there are licensing issues, like maybe there's alcohol or something like that, is the other party in a particular space where they can participate in that in a legal sort of way? You know, you want to make sure that they don't already have some issues that might prevent them from being able to meet regulatory requirements that may be out there because of what you're doing. Okay, dissolution concerns and strategies. Okay, here's always my big thing. Like, if this doesn't work out, this is like a business divorce. So how are you getting out? Like, what's your plan and strategy to leave? And let me tell you right now, like running out of the room, not answering emails and texts and phone calls, like that's not it. That's not going to work, because they're going to keep calling you and they're going to be like, that person's ghost business is like business ghosting me or something. So you actually have to think about, well, if this goes really bad, like, how do I want to get out of this? Do I just want to be able to do, you know, like both parties have to agree to terminating it? And then what happens, you know, depending upon when we terminate, like what happens if we're just starting? Well, that's not a big deal because we haven't done anything, right? But what happens if you're like way into it and you're doing some big conference together and you're one of the sponsors and the other party wants to back out like 2 days before it starts and says they want no responsibility? Like, what would you want the termination language in that contract to look like if somebody's like dropping you at that point in your relationship? And I would have hoped that there would have been some flags so you never would have gotten to that point. But it's something to think about. How do I get out? What is my exit strategy if things go downhill? All right. Management and decision-making authority. Okay, so like, who's going to get to make decisions? Like, suppose it's two people and one person says, well, yeah, I like that space. Let's use that space. And the other person's like, I hate that space. It's in a bad location. We're not going to really have the space that we need, you know. So who's going to be the final person to say yay or nay, you know? Yeah. Other investors, to the event, to the extent that you have other people who are sort of even sponsors, like, what's the expectation there? It's like, y'all give money, but I don't want you to say anything. I don't want you to do anything. You just come show up support, or, you know, come to a little pre-VIP party or something, like, you know. And so you need to be able to dictate to some extent what the expectations are going to be when you have other people who are involved and what that involvement looks like. So are they like a real person who are participating, or are they just sort of behind the scenes? Like, what's the expectation between the parties? Because that can be a disadvantage if people like give you money and then think it's like their thing. Like, they think like they get to like make decisions, and it's like, that's not the way this works. other commitments and responsibilities. Stuff's going to come up that you didn't think about. And so, you know, you need to be able to figure out who's doing what. All right. So vetting. So vetting's like the really big piece that I want to talk about. Yeah, like that's a really big piece. Okay. So one is, okay, so the easiest thing you can do is just a Google search. Like, yeah, like I know you can see my name up on the wall back there, and I'm like covering it up so you can't see it. But, so yeah, Shelia Huggins. So you would be like, oh, okay, well, let me go Google her, go to her website, check her out on LinkedIn, you know, and just make sure this person is, number one, who they say they are, see the kind of work product they've done, you know. And a lot of times people can be in the middle of transition. That's okay. There's no expectation that somebody be perfect, but you want to make sure, you know, that you have an opportunity to really take a look at the other party. Okay, so Google search, really easy. If somebody's telling you that, you know, they're another business, then, you know, you want to sort of start to look at some of the government sources, okay? So maybe you want to go to Register of Deeds and check and see if there have been any foreclosures, any liens, any bankruptcy filings, anything going on with their property. You just want to do a quick search, right? And a lot of times now you can do those searches on the internet. So as long as you have access to the name, as long as you know who the party is, okay, and typically the county that they're located in, where they reside, then you can do some of that sort of background research. Because one of the things you want to know is whether or not somebody's coming to you and they've already had a whole lot of issues. It doesn't necessarily mean you cross them off the list. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you educate yourself about a party so that you're able to make informed decisions. That is what all this is about. Property taxes, you can generally pick those up. You know, a lot of times, you know, if you're in an area where they have vehicle property taxes, real estate property taxes, you want to be able to take a look and make sure that they've been paying those over the years and that there haven't been like major issues or something like that. You don't want to think you're partnering with somebody who says they've got, you know, a whole bunch of monetary resources or some property you can use only to find out that the property is being foreclosed on, and it's on the calendar for next month, because the bill hasn't been paid for 3 years, and like, yeah, and the person's still like, and people will do that. So don't even look at me like, Sheila, that's a crazy scheme you just came up with. You know that people will do that. Social media, okay? Like, yeah, like that's the first, like, I actually need to move social media up in front of Google. But you know, Google is the #1 search engine in the world. YouTube is like now number 2, okay? But checking out all across social media, checking out Facebook, checking out LinkedIn, checking out Instagram, checking out, oh, you know, I could just go on and on and on, okay? And so you want to check out, you know, where things are coming up about the person, where things are coming up about the business, you know, and as you do the Google search, you can check, so as you're checking social media, you can, you know, see who else they're in work relationships with sometimes, especially if they have business pages, like a business Facebook page or business LinkedIn page. And then sort of ask around, right? Like, and, you know, and you're just asking, and you're not asking to like dig up dirt on somebody, but you're saying, hey, you know, here's some people I'm thinking about doing some stuff with. What, you know, what do you know? Have you worked with them before? I'll have people call me all the time and ask me for references for referrals for other attorneys in areas of the law that I don't work in. And so they may ask about a criminal law attorney or a family law attorney. And a lot of times I'll ask them like way more questions because that enables me to send them to the right person. Like they may be, well, Sheila, you know, this is something that really has to be fast tracked. So I don't want to refer them to an attorney who I know may be in a position right now where they can't really fast track a lot of client work because maybe it's somebody who's getting ready to go on vacation or they just got back and there's some other things going on. And so, you know, you want to be able to assess what the person's asking for and be able to refer them to someone. So that's the other piece with that. You want to ask around and make sure that the relationship makes sense. And then the other thing is just sort of look around, you know. if you're, if you have the opportunity to visit the person's workspace or you see them out in the community, take a look at what they're doing, how they're talking, how they talk about other people, what they do, what they sound sincere and passionate about. Just use your senses, okay? So look and listen, all right? And then your gut instinct. This is a really big one for me, because a lot of times what I'll tell clients is, as we're sitting down to talk about contracts, it's, well, hey, has there anything that's been bothering you as you've been thinking about going into this relationship with the other person? Is there something, some sort of red flag, something that just doesn't feel right? And, at that point in the conversation, I have had clients say, yeah, you know what, there is this one thing. And what I tell people is, whatever it is that's bothering you before you enter into that agreement with the other party, guess what? It's not going to change, because that they're showing you who they are, right? And if that's bothering you, then don't enter the agreement with them, because then you're just going to be unhappy. You're going to be expecting them to be somebody different, and you've already seen how they operate. And I'm not necessarily saying that they operate in a bad way, but they just may not operate in a way that's how you operate, okay? And so you're talking about two parties that are going to butt heads from day one. And so if there's something, even if you don't know exactly what it is, sometimes I've had clients say that, and they're just like, I don't know, there's something that just doesn't feel right. I'm like, okay, you need to go with it. And so we need to either put this off, or you need to find out what's going on, right? All right, so that's sort of a big one. So then I typically also have this questionnaire that I go through with people to tell them to sort of think about. And so I'm just going to mention some of the questions now. So, when you're talking about whether or not you're compatible with this other party. So it's okay, so what, why does your company exist? What is it you're trying to do? Where do you expect to be in 1 year and 5 years? And how do you expect to get there? What are the values that are most important to your company? Because then, it's are we on the same page? Okay, again, we want to make sure this is working for both parties. And then, which of those values are non-negotiable for you? Because, for some people it's okay, so if they don't do that, that's a deal breaker for me, if that's, yeah. And so you need to know that up front. I already talked about exit strategy, timeline for exiting. How you're going to talk about roles and responsibilities, and here's the biggie, we're going to do this together, but what's the main thing we both hope to get out of this? What do you hope to get out of this? What do I hope to get out of this? What do we need to get out of this? And be very clear up front, because then you always have in your mind, okay, well, I know I need this, and I know that person needs that. And so when you're making decisions, you need to be thinking about both of those. All right. Let's see, I think I skipped something. Okay, general questionnaire. And these are just some general things to be thinking about when you're talking to the other person. If it's not somebody you want to make sure you have their legal name down, any aliases, and I don't mean bad aliases, I mean trade names that you may go by. So it's here's a formal business name. And then we also have, this little name that we use on our social media pages or something like that. Professional names. You want to have addresses, a list of any other partners or business owners, any other business affiliations that they have, who else are they working with? Because you want to make sure that they're not bringing you in and you're actually going to be competing with somebody who's doing something similar. So it's either a collaboration or there's something else. Okay, so you want to be really clear about that. And then making sure that they're in a personal space where they can do this too. Because maybe the business is cool, but maybe there's some stuff going on at home that's, maybe now's not a good time for you to partner with them, and you need to be asking some questions. Maybe there's a close family member who's really sick, and so they're getting ready to have to take on a whole lot of extra responsibility. The question would be, would they then be able to give this the kind of time, energy, and effort that it would require? So maybe not. All right, so those are some of those things to think about. Some of the other things, depending on how deep you want to go in, remember I talked about the first part of the vetting process, the Google search, the social media, asking around, looking around, that sort of thing. The other piece is, well, hey, what are you going to agree to with the other party? Okay, so you can both say, well, hey, if this is requiring something where we're creating a formal business partnership, maybe we're talking about credit reports, background checks, public records. employment verification, all those sorts of things. At that level, you're talking about a whole different sort of inquiry, because typically you're talking about a more formal business arrangement where you've got two people who are really coming together, and maybe this is going to be something that's really long term, and maybe it's something with a lot of risk involved, and not just legal risk, but also monetary risk, right? All right. And so some of that due diligence, ownership and management, who are the other owners, that sort of thing. Any relationships that they might have with government officials, right? So both, in terms of advantage and disadvantage, like you want to know if apparently the other party was involved in some sort of deal, with the government, and, it blew up all in the news and it was just awful. And like, you would want to know that, right? Any civil, criminal, or regulatory matters that are out there that might be risk factors. They're like company policies. If it's just one person, hey, it's just them. But if it's a bigger company, you want to know about their company policies, their culture, their training, any of that. And let's see, what else? Potential conflicts of interest, right? Competition, all those sorts of things. Bankruptcy, insolvency issues, any of those. And then here are all the bad ones I'm going to talk about, okay? Serial litigation. Like, is this somebody, every time you turn around, when you're having the conversation with the person's like, yeah, I had to sue my last attorney, I had to sue the landlord, and even my barber, because this should be one of those red flags. Like, you shouldn't even be saying to yourself, I don't know, but there's something not right. That's very clear. Like, you're going to be the next person in line to get sued, okay? So if you couldn't figure that out, I just told you. So if you're ever in that circumstance, you know what the red flag is, right? Any associations with organized crime, terrorist groups, money laundering, bribery, corruption. Yeah, like, associations with companies that are working out of other countries. There's a whole list of countries that appear on embargo lists, okay? And so we are more international now than we ever used to be. And so a lot of times you're working with people with other countries, and you may not even realize to the extent that you may or may not be able to work with them in the manner that you're working with them. So yeah, you definitely need to keep that in mind too. So some of the pitfalls that I see people not doing is they don't conduct sufficient due diligence. They don't ask enough questions. They don't verify the information people tell you. I'm going to come back to that one in just a second. They don't act on red flags. If it's a red flag, it's a red flag. It's not like purple or green trying not to be red. It's red. And failing to follow your gut instinct. So let me go back to this adequately verifying information, because I get contracts all the time from people. My client will walk in and say, Sheila, I got this contract from another person. Can you take a look at it and tell me what you think, right? And so we start at the top. And the top is, who is the other party? And they'll say, it's ABC LLC, Associated Brick Company, Limited Liability Company. And I'll go to the Secretary of State's website, pull it up. They don't exist, or they were administratively dissolved. And I'm just like, and my clients look at me and they're like, what do you mean they don't exist? I'm like, there's no paperwork in here for that LLC. It does not exist. You would be entering into an agreement with a company that does not exist. Is that your plan? And I'm like, that's where you have to start. So even when people tell you stuff or they give you stuff, to the extent that you can, you need to do your own check on it. So if they say, hey, I live over in so-and-so, and you come to find out, okay, that's really your mom's house, and really where you live is in Virginia. You're just here a lot, and you're thinking this is a person in Virginia that you're going to be able to all of a sudden do. You just want to check, okay? Check when people give you stuff that's right, all right? So you want to make sure you have a good agreement in place. Really talking about decision-making authority, how to get out, how to bring other people in if that's the case. Let me talk about some legal considerations too. So this liability, you know, what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a place now where you're not just liable for what you do, you are now possibly liable for what this other person does, and any of the people associated with them and what you're all doing together. So you just like totally increased your risk, because now you're doing, you know, you've got these collaborations with other people. And so you want to make sure, here's the big thing about the contract, you want to make sure you have something in the contract that talks about indemnification. So if the other party messes up, they're responsible for it. If you mess up, you're responsible for it. All right. And let's see what else. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. On the tax side, again, just any takeaways from that, just making sure you have a good partnership agreement in place that talks about expenses and income. Any capital contributions, you just want to be really clear. And those are formal partnerships, you know, where you're collaborating with people. You also want to talk about, well, hey, who's paying for what happens if there's an extra charge, how do we decide that, and what if the extra charge was the other party's fault, not your fault, and you feel a little some way about that. Like having an agreement in place up front will help with that. All right, so that's pretty much it. So again, sort of the things you need to know when you're going to be working with somebody else, be it a collaboration or a formal business arrangement. A lot of times now you see social media influencers doing brand deals, and you know, it's like the brand wants one thing, but you kind of want to do it a different way, you know, so you really need to have conversations about what it's going to look like. But the biggest takeaway is to really vet your other partner, and if you have some concerns, if you have some gut instincts, if there are some red flags, some deal breakers, then you need to be willing to walk away. And what I tell my people all the time is, you know, because sometimes it's like a family friend, right? And you feel a little like, oh my God, I don't want to have to do this. You know, I don't really want to have the critical conversation, right? Because we were like walking away from that. Blame it on your attorney and say, well, you know what? I ran this by my attorney and this is just really not going to work. Hopefully we can do a deal maybe in the future, but right now this is just going to be a no-go for me. And hey, let that be it. So hope I was able to help you out with thinking about working with other people. And yeah, that's about it. Again, Shelia Huggins, and I have some videos on my Facebook page is Shelia Huggins Law, and that would be on Facebook, and it's SHELIA. And I'm also on YouTube, and I think that's Shelia Huggins Now, and there are plenty of videos there that provide some information about more the legal side of business, and then just some how-to stuff too to think about. So hopefully you got something out of this, and good luck with working with people in your business venture, whatever it is. Great.